We've asked many big questions on this show. Does the soul exist? Is it eternal? And do we have past lives? Just to name a few. And we found many answers, some by exploring fascinating lives of our guests, and others by reviewing history, both ancient and modern. To close up the season, we'd like to revisit some of what we found, just in case you missed it. I'm Sue Bianba, and this is Mysteries of Life.
In 300 feet, turn left onto Springhouse Lane.
First up, past lives.
We spoke to Carol Bowman, a past life therapist who's done thousands of sessions since the 1980s. She's also the author of Children's Past Lives and Return from Heaven, which have been translated into 22 languages around the world. As for how Carol started on this journey, it began with her own healing experience years ago.
I had some experiences when I was young that made me realize that something within us doesn't die, but I didn't really know what to do with that information. And I had chronic lung problems in my mid-30s, and I was getting visions of what appeared to be another lifetime, which I couldn't understand. And shortly after that, I found that there was a hypnotherapist who did something called past life therapy. I didn't know what it was, but I thought maybe I'll try this to see if I can get some relief from these lung problems, which had not responded well to medical treatment. So after one 2-hour session, I saw 2 lives in which I died with trauma to the lungs, and they were very emotional experiences. And to my amazement, my lungs cleared up after that one session. So my medical doctor was very surprised, and he wanted to try regression too. So I invited the hypnotherapist, whose name was Norman Ng, to my home in Asheville to work with a number of my friends who were very interested in this. And this is back in '87.
But as for how she started looking into children's cases, let's go back in time to when her son Chase was 5.
Around that time, we noticed that my son was terrified of loud booming sounds. And I couldn't understand what in his short life would create such a phobia. And I mentioned it to Norman, the hypnotherapist, when he was visiting us, thinking maybe he could give Chase, my son, some kind of post-hypnotic suggestion so the next time he was exposed to these loud booming sounds, he wouldn't be terrified. And I had no idea what was going to happen when Chase agreed that he wanted to do something about his fear. So Norman said to Chase, sit on your mom's lap. He was 5 years old at the time, so he fit on my lap. Sit on your mom's lap, close your eyes, and tell me what you see when you hear the loud sounds that frighten you. And I could see his eyelids fluttering, and he started describing something quite outside his range of experience. He said, I'm crouching behind a rock, I have a dirty uniform, and I have a long gun with a sword at the end. And I was shocked. I think I went into a mild state of shock at that point, trying to figure out what was going on. And he went on to say he didn't know what he was doing in battle. There was smoke everywhere. He didn't even know who he was shooting at. And he said, I miss my wife and family. And that was the moment that it was an electric moment for me. You know, everything changed. I really think I was in shock. And Norman, who was very experienced in past life therapy, knew that Chase was accessing a past life memory at this point because he was describing things in battle, and he described how he was shot in his right wrist. They took him out of battle, and he said, they take me to this place. It's not like a regular hospital. He said they're just a tent with a bench, like a bed, and they put him on this bench bed. and they bandaged his wrist and told him he had to go back into battle. He said, I don't want to go. You know, there are other people, they're killing people. I don't want to kill other people. And Norman explained to Chase in very simple language a 5-year-old can understand. He said, we live very many different lifetimes on Earth. In some lives we play different roles, and sometimes we're soldiers, and being a soldier, sometimes you have to kill others in battle, and sometimes you are killed, but there's no blame. And I could feel Chase's body relaxing on my lap when Norman said that. Something changed, something shifted. And you know, a couple minutes later, he just jumped off my lap, grabbed a cookie, and went to play with his Legos. And I was thinking, what just happened? What just hit me? And you know, he seems fine.
In her past life research, Carol has drawn upon works by Brian Weiss and Ian Stevenson. Stevenson founded the Division of Perceptual Studies in 1967 to study cases of claimed reincarnation using scientific methodology to investigate cases.
So he had about 900 cases that were verified by the time of his death in the late aughts. I think he died in 2008. But he didn't want to go into the healing aspects of these memories. And I was finding that that was happening with some of the cases in which I counseled the parents on how to talk the child through the past life trauma. So I realized, because I had that experience and Chase had that experience, we were familiar with that and the potential was there. So I decided that's where my focus needed to be, to educate parents about these memories, how to identify them, but also how to talk them through that process.
That's what Kathy Bird and her son, Christian Haupt, said they experienced.
I ultimately discovered a woman named Carol Bowman, and she wrote a book about children's past lives. And once I started seeing the patterns, and in her book she describes, like, you know, when children are sharing these memories, oftentimes it's right before bed, right after they wake up. They're almost like in that alpha state of, you know, not full consciousness, and it's very serious tone, not fantasy, right? Like not play. So, and everything that Christian had done was very consistent with that. Like these things that he was sharing with us were always right when he would wake up or right before he would go to bed. And then during the day, he just played baseball constantly. But once I found Carol, she was the one who kind of guided me. And she said, you know, just ask questions, like listen, ask questions, no leading questions. And you also should try to show him pictures from that time period and see if he recognizes anything or anyone or can share with you anything.
Who Christian may have been in a past life was still a mystery to Kathy at this point. Following past life therapist Carol Bowman's advice, set off the journey of discovery.
So this photo was the first photo I showed Christian after he had told us many things about being a tall baseball player in the 1920s when they were taking trains. So I found this picture of the 1927 Yankees. And I asked Christian, do you see anyone in here who doesn't like Babe Ruth? So Christian looked at the photo, he looked at all the faces, and he immediately pointed to this one and said, that's me. I didn't know who this was at the time. So what I had to do later was go down and Google that team and figure out who this was. So that's when I found out it was Lou Gehrig. Dr. Tucker from the University of Virginia School of Perceptual Studies, he came to our house. He's a person who's done a lot of research on past lives of children. And while he was here at our house, Christian said something fascinating. Dr. Tucker said to him, do you remember how you died? And I had never asked him anything like that. And he said, my body stopped working. And then Dr. Tucker said, then what happened? And he said, I felt nothing. And then out of the blue, Christian said, I picked her to be my mom, which was shocking at the time. And Dr. Tucker kept asking questions. He said, oh, really? Where were you when you picked her? And he said, in the sky. And so this was something that was completely new to me, and Dr. Tucker said it's actually quite common in these kids that recall past lives, that they actually can have specific memories of choosing their parents.
Now on to near-death experiences, also known as NDEs. Are these profound spiritual encounters evidence of the existence of both the soul and an afterlife? Jeffrey, you are the author of a New York Times bestseller, Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences, and you're also the founder of the largest near-death experience website in the world, Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. We've got lots to talk about.
First, let's start with the near-death experiences. You call them NDE. What triggered your interest?
I was back in my residency training. I'm a physician, and training for my medical specialty, radiation oncology, the use of radiation to treat cancer. This was over a quarter century ago when the internet didn't exist and we had huge bound volumes of medical journals. I was flipping through a prominent medical journal called the Journal of the American Medical Association, looking for a cancer-related article, and completely by accident I found an article that said near-death experience in it. And I was puzzled. I'd never heard of that before, so I stopped and read the article and was immediately fascinated. I mean, how can you not be fascinated by wondering what happens after we die? But reading this article, it was a prominent cardiologist, a heart doctor, who had studied patients that had their heart stopped, cardiac arrest, had near-death experiences, and when their consciousness separated from the body, by the dozens, these people were able to very accurately describe what was going on, with details about the resuscitation that would have been impossible for them to know. And I was absolutely amazed at this, started my research in near-death experience shortly after that, and now I've accumulated over 4,000 near-death experiences on the website, the largest research database in the world.
Now, the big question, why do you believe this is real and not some physical experience generated by our human consciousness, our composition, our chemistry? What proof do you have?
Right. Absolutely. Extraordinary claims like consciousness existing apart from the body during near-death experiences requires extraordinary evidence, and it's absolutely there. We talked about consciousness apart from the body, often an early element characteristic of near-death experiences, called an out-of-body experience. But it's been found that even though their physical body is unconscious or clinically dead, when their consciousness is apart from the body, what they see and hear, when they check it out later after they recover from their close brush with death, is almost invariably accurate down to the finest details. And that includes these out-of-body observations far, even miles, from their physical body that's laying unconscious or clinically dead. Even if they have these out-of-body observations far away from any possible physical sensory awareness of their physical body, when they check it out later after they recover, almost invariably accurate down to the finest details, details they could not possibly have known unless they were actually there. We've talked about supernormal senses, visual near-death experiences in the blind. We have a fairly good-sized series of near-death experiences expanding on the example I gave earlier, where you're under general anesthesia. Now, under that blanket of sleep of general anesthesia, it should be impossible to bring back any conscious, lucid, organized memory, as near-death experiences are, and especially when you're under general anesthesia and your heart stops, as is carefully validated. Of course, you're under very careful monitoring while you're under general anesthesia. The occurrence of those two events as a precipitating event of a near-death experience should mean, if you will, it's doubly impossible that there could be any lucid, organized memory at that time. And yet, by the scores, people have reported typical near-death experiences under exactly those circumstances, which should be absolutely doubly medically inexplicable.
Dr. Yvonne Cason, a researcher on spiritually transformative experiences, says she has had multiple NDEs. What she shared with us touches a lot on the afterlife.
I was a young doctor on a medevac flight, and I was in a plane crash. The plane crashed, and I almost died, and I had this incredible experience that I now know is a near-death experience. I experienced that my body, I left my body and I went into this incredible white light realm that was filled with love. Absolute incredible love. The most powerful love I'd ever felt in my life. And nobody had to tell me, nobody had to explain it to me. I just knew somehow, I just knew in my soul that what I was feeling, that incredible love, that was the love of the higher power. What I had been raised as a child to call God. But what I was experiencing God to be was not anything like what I'd been taught as a child. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging me. Have you been good? Have you been bad? No. That was not at all what I was experiencing. What I was actually experiencing was that this love power behind the universe, it was more like an infinite force, that is infinitely intelligent, that knows everything, past, present, and future, and that also loves all of us with the most incredible unconditional love. And while I was out of body in this white light love realm, I also knew things. Like somehow I knew that if my physical body down below that was waiting to be rescued after the plane crash, if my physical body died, that what I think of as me would live on, because I was already there. What I think of as me was still very much alive, although my body down there was freezing to death. And this experience also somehow revealed to me a deep understanding that's very difficult to explain, but I understood how everyone and all the world's religions are all trying to understand the same thing, but they're just coming at it from different angles. And it's like coming up a mountain from different angles. When you're at the bottom, it looks like you're really far apart. But as you're getting closer and closer to the top, it's like, oh, we're going to the same top. We're going to the same peak. It's the same one higher power that we've been striving to understand, but with different methods. And so I completely broadened my spiritual understanding after this experience. And I became no longer afraid of death because I knew I would live on. And I also had much greater understanding and compassion for people who had different spiritual views from me, because I understood we're all trying to figure out the same thing.
When we return, the astonishing choices some say they made in heaven that impacted their lives on earth. Anita Murjani, the best-selling author of Dying to Be Me, told us she had a choice to make in the afterlife during a near-death experience triggered by cancer. Spiritual beings and her father, who was in that dimension with her, had something to tell her.
They were telling me, particularly my dad was telling me that that your work isn't done yet. You haven't fulfilled your purpose yet. And you still have things to do, and it's not your time. That was the main thing. They said it was not your time. But I didn't feel they were forcing me. I felt it was still my choice. But I also felt that they were encouraging me to come back, and it was like if I didn't come back, I would be missing out on something. And it felt like that when I had come into this life the first time, that I had wanted to come here. It felt like I had wanted to come here to accomplish certain things, to fulfill certain intentions, and I hadn't fulfilled them yet. But I was still hesitant because I didn't want to come back into a sick and dying body. And then I realized that now that I understood why I had got sick, I was going to get the opportunity to actually reverse that. I was going to get an opportunity to heal those reasons. And what I understood was that now that I know the reasons, and now that I know what it is that I need to come back and do and be, that my body would heal very, very quickly. And it was with that understanding that I made the choice to come back. And when I made that choice, I heard my dad say to me, now that you know the truth, go back and live your life fearlessly.
What happened to Anita after that was nothing short of a miracle. A day later, as her body lay on the hospital bed in a coma, her consciousness returned, and those golf ball-sized tumors would disappear within weeks, she says. Then there's Betty Eadie, near-death experiencer and best-selling author of Embraced by the Light. Betty says she died after getting a hysterectomy, and in heaven met Jesus and asked why she had what she called a miserable life.
He said, because you selected that. You, as a spirit being in heaven, had grown to such wisdom that you wanted that challenge, that you were strong enough to endure that. And he said, in everything that you learned there, every experience that you draw to yourself is a learning experience, a learning curve that will grow your spirit so that when you return here, you will be greater than you were before you went there. Greater. Even the angels did not select to come here. They weren't prepared to come here. They didn't have the growth that every mortal being had in heaven. And each one of us took on the challenges that we knew we needed to have in order to grow and to acquire the greater attributes like God. We're here to acquire his attributes of love. It's number one, love, forgiveness, all these things. And we, in order to get to that point of learning what it's like to love or what it's like to forgive, you go through all these different challenges. Some things are just almost unforgivable. And so we learn to deal with that. It's how we deal with it that we grow our spirit to become more like he is. And so I was taken to different parts of heaven so that I could understand it in a greater way. I saw spirits preparing to be born on the earth. And it was interesting how they were selecting their parents. Maybe just their mother or maybe just the father sometimes. Sometimes they were already a pair. They selected them. And he also said that we all have a mission, every one of us. It doesn't have to be grand or grandiose or anything like that. It could be just simply meeting someone and helping them along their path. My mission, I believe, was to serve God by writing Embraced by the Light. Otherwise, why would he take me into heaven, give me all of this insight, and then tell me I needed to come back, and then later telling me to write Embraced by the Light? I still feel compelled to share Embraced by the Light in all that I was taught there or remembered with whomever will listen.
We learned a lot on this journey, and we found it all enlightening and memorable. We hope you enjoy the show as much as we liked making it. Listening to the different stories of spiritual transformations was inspiring. They're reminders of how we can learn from the difficulties that we encounter and how overcoming them can bring us blessings that are sometimes invisible to the naked eye. From all of us at Mysteries of Life and NTD Television, thank you for watching. It's been great having you with us.